Hello, and welcome to Beering in Mind Beer Reviews. Today we're going to take a look at a book about beer. I kind of decided that I was going to do this every 100 beer reviews, take a look at a book about beer. And I got to 100 and I did it, and then I thought, well, why not do it every 50 beer reviews? There are so many good books about beer. And today we're going to look at a book which is called My Beer Year. And this is by the writer Lucy Burningham, and she's from Portland, Oregon. And we'll take a look at the meaning of the title in a second. Beer is the experience of tasting beer, of course, is a very physical, sensual experience. We open the bottle, or in this case, a can, and we pour it, so we see the motion of the beer going into the glass, we see the carbonation, we see the colors, we see the foam, and we see whether it's translucent or not, as this one is. And of course the aroma is a major feature of beer, and the taste, and the feeling. So it's the only one I would probably say is probably not involved so much is the sense of sound or hearing. But even that is, for example, when we open a bottle or open a can, we hear it, okay, but we're not actually listening to the beer very much. So such a sensual experience, and that of course is why it's so enjoyable physically. What we're going to look at today is kind of an added dimension, which is knowledge about beer. So, and the question is whether what you know about the beer, does that add to your experience of the beer? Whether you know, for example, where it was made, what ingredients it was made with, who made it perhaps, the style of beer and how it is close to the norm for that style, or whether it's a variation on that style. So all of these things I think are important, in the experience of tasting a beer, enjoying a beer. Again, primarily a physical experience, but knowledge as well. So, you take somebody like Michael Jackson, the beer writer, for example. He had, an encyclopedic knowledge of beer of his time. Did he enjoy the beer more or less? I don't know. And this might actually, it might be a question for professors of aesthetics, or perhaps scientists with brain scanning equipment, like a MRI or something like that, to see what happens in the brain when we experience beer, or when we read about beer or know about beer. But I think reading about the subject we're interested in, of course, is a major feature of experiencing that subject. Another one of my big interests is film, movies, and the film critic Roger Ebert, who passed away a few years ago, he said at one point, one of the, of course, watching movies is the primary interest, but the second most interesting thing is to read about the movie, to read considered discussions about the movie, and to get points of view that perhaps you hadn't thought of about that film that you just watched, or about types of films, or genres or periods of film. So reading, I think, is an important aspect of that knowledge, and today we'll take a look at a person who was involved in just that, trying to get knowledge about beer. So the author of this book, Lucy Burningham, had been a journalist for a number of years, and had actually had articles in the New York Times and Bon Appetit, and so it's an experienced journalist, and also living in Portland, Oregon, which is one of the premier beer cities in the United States, and and I will say it in the world. So despite her experience of writing and living in this town where beer is such an important feature, she still felt that she was kind of a neophyte in terms of her knowledge about beer. And so she decided she wanted to learn more about beer. And to do that, she investigated and applied for the Certified Cicerone program. And some of you may know this program here. It started in 2007, and they award certification through testing at 4 different levels. And the first is Certified Beer Server, and the next is Certified Cicerone, and then Advanced Cicerone, and finally Master Cicerone. And the last one, Master, only a few people have really been awarded that. The last I checked, I think it was 16. It may be more now. Certified Beer Server, many people. And apparently, in the test, I've seen questions for the test for that. It's pretty easy. But this is kind of like for a basic beer server job here. The most popular one is Certified Cicerone. And that test, Certified Cicerone, includes both a written section and tasting sections, and it goes through 5 different topics. And the first is keeping and serving beer, and the second is beer styles. The third is flavor and evaluation. The fourth is ingredients and brewing, and the final is beer food pairing. So 5 sections here. And so what Burningham decided to do, she was going to give herself a year to study for this Certified Cicerone test. And so what we do is we follow her through this year of study and travel and drinking. So her first step was to get involved with a local Portland all-female homebrewing group. And this group was not exclusively female. It was run by women, and they had a what they called a no mansplaining rule for any men in the room. Mansplain, of course, the tendency for men to explain things to women. And in this group, in addition to making beer, they also discussed beer making as a primary female activity throughout history. And they discussed the historical point that it had been largely a female domestic activity until it became big business, and then men stepped in and took over here. And they also discussed the minority status of women in the contemporary beer scene. That's changing somewhat, but still it's largely dominated by men. So you go into a pub or a brewery and you're going to see a lot of men with big beards who work there. And so this topic, the minority status of women, comes into focus several times during the book, during her beer year. Some women just sort of shrug and say that's the way it is, but for Burningham it's kind of a sticking point, and she returns to it from time to time. So moving along from the basic home brewing, her next step is to join a tasting panel, and she does this at Widmer Brothers Brewing in Portland. And she also takes a class in identifying off flavors in beer. So this is kind of an important point for judging beer, and especially for judging at competitions, is determining if there are any off flavors in beer. She also goes to a hop processing facility in Yakima, which is the heart of the hop growing region in the northwest of the United States, Yakima, Washington. And she goes to Hair of the Dog Brewery, which is one of the best in Portland, and she learns about draft systems and how to operate them, and very importantly, how to keep them clean. And midway through the book, she goes to the Great American Beer Festival, which is the largest beer festival in the United States, and perhaps many people think it's gotten much too large. Anyway, and she tries, of course, a great variety of beers and beer styles there. She also goes to a regular bottle share meeting, and some of you may do this. I do with some friends. Occasionally we meet and bring in bottles that we have brought back from travels, and we taste them, evaluate them, and write notes on them, and some of us put them online as well. Her group has a very interesting name of WWJB, and that means, what would Jesus bring? So you better bring something good. And she brings a bottle of 2011 Samuel Adams Utopias. So I think Jesus would probably approve of that. You may have gone to a beer tasting where somebody showed up with some average macro brew, and maybe people were polite enough not to say anything, but the point is you should probably take something special. So all along the way, she's mastering a lot of information about beer, about the brewing process, about styles of beer, and techniques for serving beer. So up to this point, it's something that maybe the average beer geek has probably experienced in varying degrees here. So it starts to change halfway through the book when she begins a trip to Europe. So she goes off to Europe and she explores the heartland of traditional beer making. Three chapters of the book deal with Belgium and Belgian beer, and so she meets some of the absolute luminaries of the scene, Jean Van Rooy from Cantillon, and Armand de Belder from Dryfontein, and Olivier de Decker from Dupont. And these first two brewers, Van Rooy and de Belder, are kind of recognized as the saviors of the lambic gueuze styles. Lambic and gueuze were kind of showing declining popularity in Europe as popular European, what we call Euro lagers, were gaining popularity. And another interesting point, which I didn't know, is that the that the European Commission, in 2004, the European Commission decided that the barrels used in producing gueuze and lambic were a health hazard. And so these two brewers really worked on pressuring the union to keep this as a traditional style. Some other people will perhaps give credit to saving this style to American beer geeks who started buying up every bottle of Cantillon they could find. And where I live in Japan, you could also give a little credit to some Belgian beer importers, and there are several Belgian beer bars and shops that specialize in Belgian beer. But in any case, and she also, while meeting these people, she gets some insight into the values, the motivations that drive these brewers here. In America, breweries often feel that their next beer should make a splash. It should be different. It should be bigger or special, unusual in some way to attract people. And in Europe, people don't look at it that way so much. There is some influence from American craft beer, of course, but in general, it's not in Europe. It's not necessarily the role of business to make the beer brewery grow so much here, and in fact, she visits a brewery that is focused on the problem of trying to restrain growth, and or to not expand their business. So she visits Cantillon, she visits Dryfontein, and she also meets a very interesting homebrew club in Brussels, and their motto is plus ou moins, more or less. And they are very loose in their approach to making beer. And they give her a beer, and she takes it, and she says, "Wow, what style is this?" And they say to her, "We don't know, and we don't care." And apparently they were trying to make a maple stout at one point, and it turned into Belgian double by the time they bottled it, and that's fine with them. So, a very relaxed approach to making beer. She ends her trip in Germany, and she explores, Pilsner, Alt beer, and Kelch, and you can learn about those styles in the book, and also the distinction between Northern and German Pilsners. So, the shortest chapter in the book is on the section on food pairings, and she goes to one restaurant only, and she has a series of comments from Garrett Oliver, who's of course an expert and has written The Brewmaster's Table about food pairing and cooking with food or beer. For me, the ideas of food pairing are kind of overvalued. I don't know. So the idea of cooking beer, choosing beers to accompany food, you get some idea of intensity or resonance or contrast with the food. These are interesting ideas, but it's kind of a higher end sort of thing. Most beer drinkers, I think, are not as interested in that as in the actual beer. And beer food pairing events tend to be very expensive. You can do on your own, of course, in a simple sense. Of matching a beer to something that you cook. That's fine. Here, Burningham is a journalist, and she writes very well. She has a very smooth style, very informal, very readable style. She has a very good eye for description. She describes Jean Van Rooij as he looks like a Norwegian speed skater winning an Olympic gold medal, and Armand de Belder looks like a French CEO on vacation. In any case, she gives us all kinds of information on the European scene. A few years ago, there was this meme, beer geek meme, floating around on the internet. You may have seen it. It has two beer geeks sitting together, and one of them is holding a glass, and he's saying, "Whoa, this beer is infected, unless it's alembic. In that case, it's awesome." And so this was just a simple meme floating around here. But the point is that if you learn to discern, what's going on in the beer, the brewing ingredients, and the process, you can really improve your appreciation of the beer. You get a more rounded, fuller experience, an added extra dimension, a kind of intersecting plane of intellectual involvement with the physical involvement. And it can also, of course, help you know if you are drinking a beer that is infected or perhaps is an awesome lambic. So reading My Beer Year, I think, will improve your chances that your next beer year will be increasingly informed and memorable. So you may want to get this book, My Beer Year by Lucy Burningham. That's it for today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.